Welcome to the Hero Next Door. I'm your host, Marilyn Fitzpatrick. I'm a psychologist, a professor emerita at McGill University, and I'm deeply interested in how people take action to make the world a better place. Joining me today on Hero Next Door is Matt Langdon. Matt is the author of the Hero Handbook, a book that shows kids how to be the hero of their own story and how to discover their own inner hero journey. Matt is the president of an organization called the Heroic Imagination Project. Today, we'll talk about how people can develop their capacity to take risks and step forward when the world needs help or when someone in the world needs help. Matt's work shows that it's possible to train heroes and to diminish the possibility that we'll just stand by and let bad things happen around us. His stories of heroic action illustrate how the possibility of stepping forward can develop in each of us. Matt, welcome to the Hero Next Door. I'm looking forward to talking about the Heroic Imagination Project with you today. And maybe that's kind of a good place for us to start, is with the Heroic Imagination Project, because its aims are a little bit like the Hero Next Door, maybe not exactly the same thing, but if you could just talk to us about what it is, how it came to be.
Yeah, what it is and how it came to be. Really, it was born out of Phil Zimbardo's sort of reflections on his Stanford prison experiment and how ultimately the antidote for evil is heroism. So people taking a risk to do the right thing for others, or I think that's basically what it was. And he was sort of, I think, a little surprised by noticing that people in these kinds of situations, there was always someone who would step up and do the risky good thing.
Yeah.
And so he started writing about that, started speaking about it. And I think ultimately he spoke at the big TED conference, and just being in that room, people really resonated with his ideas around his ideas around teaching heroism as an antidote to evil. So, he was that room at TED is full of, the world's biggest entrepreneurs and thinkers. And so he had a lot of people come up to him afterwards and sort of reinforce it. You need to keep doing that. So, after a little while, he formed the Heroic Imagination Project with the idea of kind of promoting research and education, or research and tros, because there was not a lot of research in the world around heroism. There's a lot around positive psychology and certainly evil, in no small part because of him, but also the idea of teaching it. And Phil's very much a let's get the learnings of psychology research into the public and in front of the public, and almost translated for the public. So that was the beginning. And it sort of had lots of different phases. This would be 10 plus years, I think, that HIP has been in place. And for the last 2 years, I think I've been president, and we've really focused on getting that learning spreading as far as we can. We've been doing work across the world. I think we've been in every continent, I think, in the last 2 years.
Okay.
Which feels really good, and it's a real positive feeling that people are gravitating towards the message, regardless of culture or audience, and putting their spin on it and getting it into their in front of audiences in their place. So we're also doing some research now, working on grants across nations, putting some more effort into that research component.
I don't know that it's intuitive for everybody that heroes can be trained. The kind of idea of hero is that there's a burning building and someone runs in and, you know, saves someone at great risk to their own life. And you don't think of that person as having been through training for that, obviously. But
Yep.
what makes you and Dr. Zimbardo think that heroes can be trained?
Well, it's almost inverted. So that person who runs into the burning building is not the only one who sees the burning building. So there's often dozens or hundreds of people who see the problem but don't do anything. And I think that's really where our training focuses. We can point to things that probably that person that ran into the building have in their background, and that's a real big part of the research that we're doing now, is interviewing heroes about their life before the heroic act. So what we're interested in is why people don't do the heroic thing in the time of crisis. So if you ask a room of people, would you do this thing if you were in this situation? And mostly they'll say yes. And we all do that.
I hope we would.
We all hope we would. But when it comes down to it, it's clearly not the case. And, you know, with those hero stories, if they get into the news afterwards, the hero in question always says something along the lines of, I just did what anyone else would do, which is clearly not the case, because there were people there who did not do that thing. So that's really where our focus is looking at why people don't do the thing that they think they would, or that they think they should, and helping break those barriers down.
It's very similar in our own work at Hero Next Door. So when we identify people that we want to interview as heroes and we approach them, they say, I'm not heroic. I just do what everybody would do. Exactly the same thing that you're saying. Everybody does this.
Yeah.
But of course, everybody doesn't, eh?
Yeah. And that's, you know, we run a conference every year too, the Hero Roundtable, and with the idea of getting people to speak about heroism. And, you know, that we invite researchers, journalists, sports people, whatever. But one of those subcategories is someone who's done something, and it's often activism. But they regularly turn me down and say, no, I'm not a hero. I can't be on the stage. And that's not the point. We're not asking you to get on stage and say, look at me, I'm a hero. We're interested in you sharing how you did what you did and how others could do something similar.
So can you just define for us what the Heroic Imagination Project sees as a hero? Like,
as a hero,
what is
yep.
it to be a hero?
Yeah, and that definition's almost always the first thing I cover when talking to an audience, and it's a tough one just to present to an American audience, let alone taking it to another country. So, you know, every new country we go to, we have to have this conversation because it has a different connotation. So for us, there's three components. One, that the person has to take action rather than inaction. They have to do it on the behalf of others. So there's no selfish intent or self-focused intent. And there has to be risk or sacrifice. And that's often the part that people flag us on and say, you know, it doesn't need to have that. It's, you know, if you do something nice for someone else, that's taking action for another person. But really, that's being a nice person. And we promote that. We're happy for people to be nice people. And we're glad there are altruists in the world. But heroism really comes down for us to that risk or sacrifice. And really, a sacrifice is just a risk that has 100% chance of happening. So it's, you know, there's a risk of, you know, losing social status or being injured or whatever it might be. A sacrifice is saying, yep, that's definitely going to happen, but I'm going to do this thing anyway.
All right. So I'll just play devil's advocate. If I give money to a cause and that money is meaningful to me, it's a sacrifice.
Yep.
Does it make me a hero according to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of this is subjective, clearly, by the definition. So, but it's a great question, and it comes up often. And when it's meaningful to you, what's the definition of meaningful? How is it debilitating? Is it, are you really sacrificing something? So is a 10-year-old giving $2,000 to someone different to a millionaire giving $2,000 to someone? Absolutely. Is a 10-year-old's life being meaningfully changed by giving that $2,000? Possibly not, because they're probably being held up by their family. So it does come down to the individual. Similarly, the same sort of question comes up around, a firefighter rescuing someone from a burning building. Is that heroic, or is that just their job? And so it really is down to the individual. Is there a risk or sacrifice to that person that performed the act? I've got an example of a parkour guy in London, someone who jumps up and down walls and across gaps and all sorts of things. He jumped onto a train track to rescue someone who'd fallen off, and found nothing abnormal about that act, because he knew exactly what his body could do. He knew the distance, he knew how to jump, he knew how to lift, and he knew how to escape, which is quite different to just your average Joe who's on the platform, who really doesn't know any of those things, and they jump down anyway because they know they have to do something. So it is very much subjective to the person, the situation, etc. But the risk needs to be there.
Okay. And so the people who listen to us are interested in helping themselves and others develop in terms of altruism or their giving capacity. What do you do to train heroes? I mean, you train people to be heroic. What do you do?
Yeah, so a number of years ago, I was being interviewed by The Guardian in London, the newspaper, and I just said this as a way of trying to explain what heroism is. And I said the opposite of a hero is not a villain, it's a bystander. And that has really become our focus, that we're trying to turn a bystander into a potential hero. Mm-hmm. And the way to do that is to try to educate the people, everyone, about why people remain bystanders when they know they should do something. So there's a lot of psychological barriers there. There's social barriers there. So I'll give you a couple of examples, but there's the famous sort of bystander effect, which suggests that the larger the group, the less likely anyone is to help, which comes down to really a moving of responsibility. So you can say, well, I don't need to do anything because there are 99 other people here. Mm-hmm. Who, someone will do something. Could be that. It could be someone's more skilled to handle this than I am. It could be it's someone's job to do this. So there's lots of ways that we can justify to ourselves that we don't need to take the action because someone else will. And there are lots of famous examples of where that doesn't go well. There's fear of failure in public. People don't like to embarrass themselves, so they prefer to stand back. There's a lot around helping behavior around people who are like us. And so our instinct is to not risk anything to help someone who's not like us. Mm-hmm. And not like us can be all sorts of things, anything that we choose to focus on. So for example, with that, one of the trainings that we try to do is get people to think more about the groups that they do belong to, or the similarities that they have with people around them. Mm-hmm.
And presumably to expand the group.
Absolutely. So there was a great study done in University of Exeter. Mark Levine did an experiment that's done in a lot of places, where he got a group of Manchester United soccer fans to write an essay about why they love Manchester United, and then walk across the campus, and there's an opportunity to help someone who needs help. And sometimes that person was wearing a Manchester United jersey, sometimes their arch enemies, Liverpool, and sometimes a neutral. And again, anyone who's done any psychology will recognize this. The Manchester United fans overwhelmingly helped the Manchester United fan. But then he changed the prompt of the essay at the start to why do I love football? Not why do I love this specific team, but why do I love this sport? And it equalized the helping behavior between the two teams, even though they were arch rivals. The commonality was that they loved football, so they were more likely to help the football fan than the neutral person.
So the more groups that I see myself belonging to, I mean, I belong to a very large group that's probably about 50% of the world population, called women.
Yep.
And so if I could see that as a commonality that would be global and very far reaching.
Absolutely.
So that's what
Absolutely.
you're trying to do, is encourage people to see themselves as part of bigger groups and more groups.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, and really identifying as part of that group, because it's easy to just say, well, everyone's a human, so everyone should just help other humans. But we know that's too big of a group, too big to comprehend even. So looking at, it's the other groups that we feel strongly part of. So you can feel strongly part of the female grouping, but if you don't, you're going to be looking for other things. So I'm certainly more likely to help someone with an Australian flag on their backpack when I'm traveling Europe than I am someone who's not, for example. That's a great example, I think, of seeing your group when there's no other examples around, I suppose.
And so I can ask myself what groups I belong to and identify with more and more groups. That would help me develop. What else can I do?
Absolutely. You can get used to being uncomfortable. Or a grouping of the barriers to action are that feeling of, I don't want to step out of my comfort zone. So getting comfortable being uncomfortable is a good thing to do. Zimbardo used to get his students to put a dot on their forehead and walk around campus for a day and not address it with people and just feel people staring at them. So that kind of thing where you take away that barrier of fear of performing in public or fear of an audience watching you, fear of standing out.
So anything I do to allow myself to be seen, however, is going to
and really feel uncomfortable, feel watched, feel uncomfortable.
Okay. So I know you train people in this. What happens to them? What do you hear from them after you train them?
That's a tough question because we don't often see the people again after we've trained them, right? So, but there are a couple of examples for sure. One of my favorite is because this was very much what the goal was in me going into this school. I'll try to be brief. So the school brought me in because the year before, it was a middle school. The year before, the whole school had gone out into the public to do a sort of end of year picnic celebration. And so the middle school's 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Two of the 7th grade girls got into a fight, a physical fist fight. And basically the whole student body circled around and watched, and no one did anything. And it caused a lot of public embarrassment. And the principal was really uncomfortable with the idea that none of the students stood up to do anything. So they brought me in, and I worked with the 6th graders the next year on I think it was their 2nd day of school. So this is, a brand new cohort trying to figure out their place in the world. And one of the messages I left with the kids is that you as the student body have the most power in this culture that you're in, this community that you're in, to make change. So if you don't want things to be a certain way, you can make that change if there's enough of you that do it. And you can say, this is my school. That's not how it is here. This is my school too. We don't do that kind of thing here. And the next week, I went in to work with the 7th graders. No, that's not true. I went in to follow up with the principal. And he said, you're not going to believe this, but one of the, after school, all the buses turned up and kids are jostling to get on the buses. And an 8th grade girl was being abusive to some other 8th graders. And one of the 6th graders, so this is the second week of middle school for this 6th grader, went up to this 8th grader and said, you need to stop that. This is my school too. We don't do that kind of thing here. And
you just gave her the words and she used them.
Absolutely. And she felt the power of her existence to make that change. But the perfect thing was that 8th grade girl that was doing was behaving aggressively was one of the girls in the fight from the year before. So this is a clearly scary girl who was 2 years older, and this 6th grader still felt that that's how you do it. That's how you make change. So that was really good. We've had 3 times we've had reports back about someone who stopped on the road after seeing a traffic accident. So each time their default response was to drive past because they assumed it would be taken care of. Yep. And each time they recalled their experience with us and turned around to go back, and each time found that no one was helping. And so that's really powerful too, that and sort of reinforces that this kind of training is something that you can recall when needed. So they recognized their bystander behavior and remembered that they could do something. Now, whether that's heroic or not, or whether it's doing the right thing, just it's overcoming the barriers to action for sure. So that's really good to hear too, and because the imagination part of the Heroic Imagination Project is a key piece, that you can imagine yourself being the hero and overcome those barriers when they come up. And it's that instant recall, that it's more a reaction than it is thinking about what I should do in this situation, especially when there's risk. The more you think about acting in a situation that's high risk, the less likely you are to do it.
Yes.
So we're really looking at reactive behavior based on previous thinking, based on overcoming those barriers, adherence to a personal set of values. All those sorts of things make it more reactive than a thinking process.
So I know the Hero Handbook is written for children, and you just referred to imagination. Are kids good at this? Is this an easier thing to train with younger people than it is with older people?
Absolutely. When I started teaching heroism, I was teaching kids exclusively because kids are happy to practice things. They're happy to learn and try things out. And I think adults broadly are pretty confident that they know everything already. And I think that's just, it's been how long has it been? 15 years, 17 years since I've started doing this. And I think that's only gotten worse. I think adults more and more think that they know everything they need to know. And evidence is just a pesky thing that gets in their way, or that they don't let get in their way. So, there are definitely people who pick it up and run with it, but kids are ready to try things out. They've got a worldview that they do learn and they change and they can practice.
And talk to me about the role of imagination, either when you're teaching with helping kids to do this, or adults. Like, how do you engage imagination? Imagining scenarios, or you offer people scenarios and ask them to think them through?
Yeah. So, the easy thing to do is when you see a story of heroic behavior or not heroic behavior, imagine what you would do or what you could do in that situation. So just walking through the steps of, well, I could have done this, I could have done that. It's a really strong indicator of heroic behavior that you've thought about acting heroically in the past, and probably often. I've got two great examples from the same incident for this. There was the terror attack on the train to Paris, must be 5 years ago now, 6 years ago, where famously the three American young guys got up and attacked the gunman. Do you remember that story?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was another older English guy who also jumped in. And so I'll start with him. He took that train often. So this was a familiar space for him, familiar experience. And he had often wondered what he would do if a gunman came onto the train. So that imagining this situation and what would I do? Where would I go? What would I do? What could I use? And it's that kind of behavior that's, you often see in sort of spy movies where they walk into the room and they say, well, I know there's 3 people over there and there's an exit there and there's they've scoped out the situation. But his imagination had been fired by this thinking over the years. His instant reaction was to hide behind a chair or a seat on the train. And then while crouched down hiding, he said to himself, what am I doing? Like, I've been thinking about this all these years. I've got to get up and do something. And he did. So that's one example where you have thought about the situation.
Yeah.
Specifically or something similar. The other one was there were 3 American guys. 2 had military training and 1 didn't. And Heroic Imagination Project interviewed Anthony, and one of the things he said was
he the one who didn't?
He didn't, yeah. So he during the interview, one of the questions is sort of what was your consumption of stories as a young person? And he loved the Power Rangers when he was a kid, and I think the blue Power Ranger was his favorite. And and he imagined himself being the blue Power Ranger and going on these adventures and doing these heroic things. And at the end of the interview, our researcher said to him, on that day on the train, did you imagine yourself as the blue Power Ranger running forward? And he kind of sat back and was like, yeah, I did.
Okay.
And so again, that by reading stories and imagining yourself as the hero of stories, that's those 2 pieces of imagination are what we really think fires people's ability to act in those stressful situations.
It's like kind of having this heroic persona, the Power Ranger, that he identified with. Because there's another part of training, like you talked about firemen before, and when I was a kid, I did lifeguard training, and they very much teach you, do this, don't do that first, do that second. Here's a good technique for this. Be careful not to do that. So, and it's a lot about that. And I mean, not only did they teach us to imagine, they made us get in the water and have people try to drown us and so on.
Yep.
But that was very, very specific. I don't know that I took from that the sense of my own capacity in anything other than lifeguarding,
Absolutely.
You're really looking, because it's unlikely you're going to train for the exact thing that happens.
Absolutely. I think but the more situations you can imagine yourself in, the more likely the situation that you find yourself in is going to have some similarity to something before. So I think that the lifeguard training is a great example of hero training. Like we hope that the people doing our training will never have to act heroically, because it's often a scary, dangerous situation that you just prefer not to be in. But the same goes for lifeguard or CPR training. We would hope that you never have to use that. But if you're in a situation where someone needs it, you're ready. Yeah. And so lifeguard training is the difference between someone jumping in to rescue someone and someone not. I'm very unlikely to jump into a river to save someone because my swimming is terrible.
Yeah.
If, however, I spent a year learning to swim and swim well and rescue people, I'm much more likely to jump into that river because I know the skills are there. And that's along the lines of that parkour expert who he knew what he could do. So it was just second nature to do it.
They also taught us, and maybe this is a bit off topic, but they taught us good judgment. In other words, don't jump in if you can throw a buoy to them. Like if you can save them without getting in the water and putting yourself in danger, they can still take you down. Don't try that. Yeah,
and you do that. You get that in first aid training as well, as survey the scene first. Make sure you're safe, or as safe as possible, and then make your judgment. But yeah, absolutely, don't jump in the water and become someone else who needs to be rescued,
or someone else who goes down.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so you referred before to research on the bystander effect, and you also alluded very briefly to studying the qualities that maybe people already have that are more likely to make them heroes. And maybe it's imagining being a Power Ranger, there's one. But are there more general qualities that you've started to isolate in your research, or is it too early days to talk about that?
Yeah. Look, there's some pretty clear stuff around empathy. If you don't have empathy for others, why would you risk yourself to help them? And I think that ultimately that's the big one. Pretty early on, we were aligned with character development and thinking about the characteristics of a hero, and ultimately what we decided was that heroism is character challenged. So if you can be a caring person every day of your life until there's a moment where you have to be caring and lose something for it. Or you can be honest every day of your life until being honest is going to cause you problems. And I think that's where heroism comes into it. I think ultimately heroism sits above character as that test point. So certainly people who are caring of others are more likely to act heroically, but it's not a certainty, because under that stress and that test, those things can fall away. So we don't get too much into characteristics of a hero, and particularly because that gets into the idea that good people act heroically. The good people, and there's a lot of stories of people who were not society's good people who acted heroically in a situation. And I think that's a really important component too, is that heroism is in the act. It's not a lifelong title, because of that, taking action on behalf of others for a risk or sacrifice. Ideally, that's not happening to you every day. So you're not being tested every day and acting heroically every day. So it really is down to what you do in the moment. So again, there's examples of people in prison acting heroically, people with arrest warrants out for them acting heroically, people who acted heroically and then did something terrible. So it's very, very dependent on the situation and the person that happens to be in that situation.
As a society, is there anything that we should be doing to raise our children more heroically, to give them a chance?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a whole can of worms. I mean, I think empathy is the big one, and recognizing your connections with other humans. I think we're doing a lot of siloing at the moment in Western society, particularly of these are our people and everyone else is bad. I think also risk taking. I think we're leaning towards protecting our kids and bubble wrapping them, We
Coffee
need them.
cups that say coffee is hot.
Yeah, yeah. We need more risk in kids' lives, and probably in our adult lives as well, because risk is part of life. It's part of growth, and I think the more risk averse we are, obviously, the less likely we are to act heroically for someone. So, I think those are probably the two big ones: is developing empathy and connection to others, and taking risks, whether that's climbing a tree or going for a walk to school instead of being driven and dropped off, those sorts of things.
Okay. That's going to be a hard one. I think that's a hard one to sell, eh? I was listening so it's the end of camp season here, and the kids are just all coming home from camp and going back to school in the next week or two. And I was listening to an interview this morning on the radio. They were talking to people who were running camps and what's the qualities of a good camp. First, you keep the children safe.
Yeah.
and I don't think if I was sending my kids to camp at this point, I don't think I wouldn't be disagreeing with that. But
no, it's a tough one.
There's an acceptable level of risk, I think, is what
look, I've got a great example for that. I worked at the camp for 12 years in Michigan, and the last summer that I was there, our insurance company would come to staff training every year and train the staff on safety. And we almost had to detox the staff after that because it was so unrealistic. But one of the things I'll never forget, and because this is 20 some years ago now, they said, before the kids come to camp, you have to clear off the sticks off all the trails. And we're on 300 acres of woods, and they wanted us to clear the sticks off the trails for safety. And you can imagine how they got there, but the idea of not having sticks on the paths in the woods is just it's such a great symptom of the overprotection of the society.
Okay. But if you're thinking as a parent at this, and you're thinking, okay, I would like my child to have empathy for others. I would like them to be the kind of person who steps in, even if it's a risk. Then I need to really think about protecting them from so many things and give them a little bit more chance to do risky things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they should be able to fail. They should be able to fall over. I having moved from the States back to Australia and back to a small town in Australia, my kid at 4 or 5 was walking down the street, which would have got me arrested in Michigan at that time.
By herself walking down the street.
Yeah. I was getting called up in Michigan for my kid walking at age 3 in front of me in the supermarket. People are like, where's your mother? Where, just grabbing her and protecting her in the supermarket. So there are some cultural things there for sure. The world's not as dangerous as the stories would like to tell us, I think. And you can see that culturally. I mean, I was just in Japan, and there's kids walking around, young kids walking to school, probably 5 years old, with their lunchbox, and it's just a way of being, I think. I just yesterday read an article about the problem of kids getting into college without having taken any risks, and the expert that was consulted suggested that the US prepares, what was it? They prepare their kids in the Italian way, which is that kids stay living with their family until they're 30. So they do the slow progression, but they treat their kids like the Germans, which is they kick them out of home at 18. So the kids aren't prepared to leave home at 18, but they're sent out of the home at 18, unprepared. So there were a couple of examples there of college kids being asked to do something risky or scary, and One was cooking dinner for the family, and one was driving a car by themselves on the highway. And I just thought, that's really symptomatic of a society that's protecting its kids too much.
Uh-huh. Yeah, what's the risk of cooking dinner for your family, that you're going to burn it, or?
They just had never done it, and it was a really scary thing to do.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, well, if you think about advanced education or lots of life, if you're afraid to try things, that there's lots of downside to that.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with heroism, but
yeah, we could do a whole nother episode on that, I think, on parenting.
So if I wanted to develop my own inner hero, and I want to prepare myself, I'm going to imagine myself in situations of risk. I'm going to imagine myself acting that way. I'm going to identify with as many groups as I've tried to see myself as having things in common with people who I would normally see as quite different than me.
Yep.
I'm going to do a little bit of mental rehearsal. Anything else?
Yeah, but that being uncomfortable.
Being uncomfortable, yes, I'm going to expose myself.
Being seen and being and feeling uncomfortable because of it. I think those are the big things. Consuming stories and again doing that imagining, like, could I do this? How would I do this? What's a different way of doing this? I think the other thing too is a lot of common situations where people could act heroically in our society. They're around social issues, around bullying and racism, that sort of thing, that people see it as a binary. It's either do nothing or do this really big, scary thing. And in fact, there are lots of things in between. Mm-hmm. And I think, that goes for the person in the river too. And as you said, it's not necessarily jumping into rescue. It could be throwing them something. It could be extending a stick. Mm-hmm. But because of that
there binary, are no sticks on the path, though.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Because of that binary nature, it's much easier to do the nothing, because the other thing is really big and scary. But there are things in the middle, and I think some of that is just educating yourself about what those things might be, and that could be simply stepping back and thinking about it. What else could I do?
This has been a really interesting conversation. Are there other things that you think people would like to know that I haven't asked you about? Like, what questions that you normally get?
I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, I think that what's really interesting to me is that all the different ways that people discuss heroism, and we haven't talked about the other definitions of hero, and that are all legitimate definitions. I think one of the other things that you can do is have heroes.
Okay.
Having heroes makes you more likely to act in that way. So, having the blue Power Ranger as your hero makes you more likely to act accordingly. But it also just gives you more examples of people who have acted heroically in different ways. I'm watching with my kid at the moment the story of Meep Geese, who hid Anne Frank and family.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
Just seeing all the different moments of decision there that she had to make over time is giving my kid examples of the kinds of decision making that might come in front of her. So the more stories you can consume, I think the better, and the more heroes you can have and identify with.
That's an interesting story too, because of course she would want to have not been identified at all, right?
Yeah.
To have been able to keep this a complete secret for her safety and for the safety of Anne Frank and her family. Yeah. So we have to expand our thinking a little bit of what a hero isn't always seen as a hero.
Oh, no, absolutely.
It's quite private.
Yeah, there's a great group in Kansas that does work around unsung heroes, and these people that sort of get uncovered after having done something something incredible and they just keep it to themselves. They don't spread the word. And that often happens in subway hero stories from New York or wherever. Person jumps on the tracks, picks them up, and then just gets on the next train. They don't wait for the news to arrive. They just dust themselves off and head off. They're not interested. Yeah. And humility is a big part of heroism. If anyone who tells you that they're a hero, you should be immediately suspicious of them.
So would you like to just talk a little bit about the Hero Roundtables that are coming up and how people can find the Heroic Imagination Project if they want to?
Yeah, so Heroic Imagination Project's at heroicimagination.org. We have some online trainings that you can go through at your own pace. But especially if you're part of a group, we've in the last year we presented it at schools, universities, corporations, non-profits. There's any audience really can use this. The Hero Roundtable is a 2-day conference with short talks similar to sort of TEDx style, with people from lots of different backgrounds. So you'll be there, but before you there might be a professional speaker who speaks 200 times a year, and then after you there might be someone who's on the stage for the very first time. You might be in previous events, it could be you've got a Holocaust survivor sitting next to you and a professional NFL player on the other side of you. So it's really getting lots of different people's perspectives and thoughts on heroes and heroism, and just it's a really great experience to meet other people who maybe think like you or make you think in a different way. So the next one is in Michigan in October 9th and 10th. HeroRoundtable.com/Michigan if you want to go directly to the site. Yep. It's our 10th anniversary. So it started in 2013 as an idea for a one-off to get a bunch of hero researchers and thinkers together, and has turned into this thing that I think this is our 15th or 16th around the world. They've been in Australia, in Europe, San Francisco. So it's it has taken on a life of its own, and it's a great experience. It's a couple of days of just really positive people connections, and you walk away thinking, I can do something.
Matt, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast and sharing your ideas about how we can actually train ourselves to take actions that are a risk to ourselves but make a difference in the world. We'll put links to the Heroic Imagination Project in the show notes, and I hope people will look you up and think about attending a Hero Roundtable someday. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Hero Next Door on Spotify or Google Podcast. Watch us on YouTube, or link through our website, www.becomingyourbestself.org. And please join us again soon.